Welcome. So glad to have you here. My name is Whitney Lee, and I'm here with Jonah. Jonah, will you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. My name's Jonah Kowall, and I am a maintainer of the Jaeger project. Also work on OpenSearch, and my day job is running and building product and engineering teams at various startups.
Amazing. So Jonah and I just had a conversation that was about an hour and a half long, where Jonah taught me all about Jaeger. And in case you don't have time to watch that long conversation, we're making this recap for you. We just made this board together. But let's begin by talking about what was the world like before Jaeger existed that caused Jaeger to get created?
Sure. So Jaeger was created to help teams understand complex microservices architectures.
So I'm just going to jump over to this part of the board where we talked about a use case to really give color to the problem. So you told me the problem is like multiple teams are building different aspects of the same application. And when there's a problem, it's really hard to know where that problem was. So what did you say they did before distributed tracing?
So we used to just get a lot of people together on a conference call or in a room and try to debug the problem together, where everyone would look at their own view and their own slice of the application. Meanwhile, the user is unhappy that something's not working, and you're sitting there in a room trying to figure out how to solve that problem with limited data. So that's why we built distributed tracing, to try to provide that gap.
Awesome. So Jaeger is a distributed tracing system designed to collect, store, and visualize traces. But what is a trace?
So a trace is an end-to-end transaction. So a good example of that we were using earlier in the discussion was like a checkout transaction on an e-commerce site, where you click checkout, and that in itself generates a set of spans, which are basically parts of that distributed trace. Oftentimes you'll see many different transactions spawn from that single button that you click on the application.
So one acronym that came up during our conversation, it was a live stream, we had chat, is APM. Will you talk a little bit about APM and what that has to do with tracing?
Yeah, so APM was a market created before distributed tracing, but distributed tracing is always a component of APM. So the difference when you talk about monitoring versus application monitoring is that we started looking deeper into the application and really understanding how the application works. And that's why APM was created as a market or a set of technologies.
That's so helpful to understand. And one thing I didn't know also before I did the stream with you is Jaeger is pretty closely tied with OpenTelemetry. Will you talk about OpenTelemetry and its role and how Jaeger works?
Yeah, so OpenTelemetry is a standard set of libraries and agents that's designed to extract data from applications. And that data comes in the form of three data types: logs, metrics, and traces. And Jaeger is focused mostly on the tracing side, although we deal with some metric data.
So Jaeger leverages OpenTelemetry to instrument applications to generate the data that Jaeger collects.
Yeah.
So about that data, though, if you're talking about, when you say a trace is every single step that a call goes through, that to me is like very granular. There's a lot happening. So it must be a high data situation. So what do you do to manage the compute cost of capturing data that's so granular?
Just like any observability system, it's a big data problem. So ideally, we want to be as efficient as possible on what we collect. In the world of tracing, we use a technique called sampling, which allows us to collect a subset of the data instead of everything. Most companies start out collecting everything, but as they start looking at their bills for their storage or their computer, their network, they come and ask, how do we make that bill smaller? And we introduce them to the wide world of sampling to solve that.
So we have Jaeger. This diagram represents the inputs. So the inputs are applications that are each using OTel to outputs the data, application-specific data. And then our output, we have two outputs. So let's talk about these two outputs of what's happening with Jaeger. So what's the first one?
So the first is data storage. So when the data comes into Jaeger, Jaeger then stores that into a database or what we call a backend. It's basically a data storage system.
Okay. One thing Jaeger is doing is receiving the data from OTel and then putting that data into storage. And then what's the second thing Jaeger is doing?
Yeah, the second thing's really the value of the solution, which is the ability to visualize and analyze that stored data and provide the value to the user.
That's cool. And so we can visualize the whole application topology from here. But what I'm learning from you is that it really helps with troubleshooting. That seems to be the big value of having this trace data. And then how do you access that troubleshooting data that you're getting from Jaeger? Because you want to be able to ask like arbitrary questions of your system at this point, right?
Yeah, you can ask questions like, show me the traces that are over a second long, or show me the traces that have errors, or show me the traces that come from this specific user. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can filter and analyze the data. And it can be used not only for troubleshooting, but to optimize the performance of the application. So what are the things that I need to speed up to make my application faster? Jaeger can answer those questions really easily.
That's amazing. And so Jaeger is the de facto way to visualize OTel trace data, which is a big deal. We talked a little bit about logs versus traces, and why you would want to use one versus the other. So logs are good for non-interactive and or batch processing. And then what are traces good for especially?
Yeah, anything that's interactive where there's a transaction that's occurring that you really want to understand the end-to-end performance of it. It could also be batch, but it's most likely something real-time that's occurring, usually by a user or by an API that you really want to dig into.
And then the last thing we covered, I guess the second to last thing, is scaling Jaeger. So when these apps generate lots and lots of information, the databases can't always receive it fast enough. And so what should one do if they're having that problem?
So usually you can either scale the database, but also you'll likely introduce some type of queuing mechanism. The most popular being Kafka, which is another open source project. And that can help either when there's a burst of data, let's say you're running a new promotion and your site traffic spikes, your traces are going to spike. So dealing with those data spikes that occur. And the other is if the database is just really busy, then you can at least store and queue that data instead of just discarding it and dropping it on the floor. So it gives you some more flexibility with burstiness.
Burstiness, I like that.
Yes.
So when we think about scaling Jaeger, we just talked about scaling, okay, the storage side is something to concern. But sometimes we need to scale this side of it too, the ingestion side. What are some things to think about when you're scaling the ingestion side of Jaeger? Mostly
it's about sampling, but also making sure that the data is accurate. Sometimes you can oversample or you can drop data that you need. So ideally you want to get as much as you need and then as little as you don't need. That's always the goal, but it's an art, not a science. It's not so easy to solve that one. And you talked about during the stream that another problem that people might have is if they're using their OTel collectors in a tiered way, then that can sometimes be a bottleneck too. And it's something to be deliberate about and to look out for. You definitely have to scale the collectors, and there's a lot of different techniques to scaling collectors in OTel. Yeah. Yep. Finally, let's talk about if I'm watching this right now and I want to use Jaeger, how do I get started? If I want to contribute it, what's next for me as someone who's interested in Jaeger? Yeah, so on GitHub, we have lots of issues open. Some are tagged with help wanted or good first issue. Those are both good areas to look at. Feel free to jump on the CNCF Slack and talk to us. We're all there. We'll answer questions, especially if you want to contribute, helping you get started. And you can also follow us on social media. We have a Medium blog, and we're at all the CNCF conferences like KubeCon, where you'll be able to talk to me and other maintainers of the project. We're happy to answer questions or entertain ideas that you may bring to us. So we try to be as open and collaborative with the community as possible. Well, that's a wrap.
Thank you so much, Jonah, for sharing your time and expertise this morning. And thanks everyone who watches the recording.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Appreciate it.